Hello, Tim.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hey.
Tim, I said every time we come on, we're eating. I apologize.
I know it makes me jealous sometimes.
I'm waiting. Let's pick a date and y'all will come out over.
So,
How's by you? Anything new?
no, just all of a sudden it got really kind of cloudy. I don't know if it's going to rain again or not.
Oh, yeah, it got dark here. I was going to do a little more outside work, but that certainly got canceled. We're going to only be able to watch about 40 minutes or so,
Okay.
and then we'll pick you up on the recording. This will be posted, right?
It will be.
Right, very good.
Yeah, we'll see. We're going to kind of put an end to the Tuesday night classes till after the High Holy Days.
Right.
But so far, preparations for the High Holy Days are going well, so that's good. But it's a lot of work. It's actually more work doing it virtually than it is if we were doing services in person.
Well, you can't recover.
No.
I mean, when you're doing it live, if something goes wrong, you can plug somebody in.
Right. No, this time, and then it's just trying to organize everybody to get in, do the part they're doing.
Right.
And then the biggest issue is going to be splicing all of that together. There's so much, so many people, so many different parts. And then we've got music from the cantor. We've got music from the e-cantori, the choir. We've got Kelly with music. So, all of that has to somehow be spliced together to make a coherent, smooth service. And that's a lot. That is a lot.
Yes, it is. But once you have it, it's in the can.
That's true.
And you're not limited to the number of people who can watch it. We have a different problem in Bluffton. They're going to do a lot of this participation live via Zoom.
Right.
So people are going to read. Now they can only have on their setup 100 Zoom terminals open.
Right.
So with 100 Zoom terminals and 400 people wanting to watch it, they have to appeal to everybody to go to the webinar site, YouTube, watch it there unless you have an active part.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are going to be shut out.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see, how many people tune in for the different services for, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Kol Nidre, Yom Kippur. And then, it's what we have to do this year. We don't really have an option.
What are our Orthodox and conservative brethren doing?
Well, Agudat Hakim is doing the same thing we are. They are doing virtual services. But BBJ is actually going to do live in-person service. They have a very large sanctuary if you've been in it. And they're going to do social distancing, spacing. I don't know that they'll have room for everybody. I don't know how they're deciding who gets to show up, but they won't break their rule of not using electronics on the holidays. So, I don't know that they would have a choice other than to just not have services at all if they didn't do, something live.
Or the rabbi could have ruled it's a life and death matter, and you can use electronics.
Well, see, that's what I said. I said this is not a typical situation. It is a matter of life and death. You're putting people's health at risk, and so to me, it goes back to pikuach nefesh, the saving of a life, which overrides every restriction on the holidays or on Shabbat, and therefore you can use the electronics. I don't understand why they haven't done that from the very beginning, but.
Plus they can put the switches on ahead of time.
Right.
You can do everything ahead of time and all set it up automatically.
Right. Well, and a lot of things you can have on a timer. So when the service is over, they could have it on the timer to just shut off or whatever they need to do. I don't know. I hope they don't regret their decision, but we'll see.
And I hope nobody regrets it over there.
Right. Here we go. People showing up.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How we doing? Up in
Good.
Wisconsin?
Doing well.
Good, good.
We're in the 80s today, so we're catching up to you guys.
Yeah, we were today. It was 90, 91 today again.
Humidity came
Plus.
back.
Well, the humidity the last couple of days has
Right.
been horrific, absolutely horrific. But September's around the corner. Not that that means it's going to cool down that much, but September is around the corner. So
Yeah.
Tim, I have a question.
yes.
I read something, I have it here, how in the Middle Ages, there were traveling storytelling preachers
Uh-huh.
known as Magadim. Am I pronouncing it right?
I don't.
Maggidim.
Magadim. Yeah.
Magadim. I've never heard of them. So these are people who went around telling stories, and that's how people learned about things with Judaism.
Yes. Yes. I mean, you have to remember that
Oh,
it was people. A lot of people couldn't read. You know, literacy rates were low.
yeah. The oral tradition.
Right. You know, I mean, that was true of people across the board. You know, the reading was not a skill that everybody had. So, you know, you had to do things orally, pass it on orally, you know. Only the elite. I mean, for many years, well, especially in the Christian church, it was only the clergy that could read. So, you know,
Tim,
yes.
it's Kathy.
I-
So did you get my email yesterday about the 2 days?
Yes, I did. I did get that, and I'm going to investigate it more with the rabbi. But he is just so inundated with high holy days right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Trying to capture him is like, forget it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't think he really would know because it happened sometime through in Rabbi Belzer's time. When I
Right.
checked with Peggy, she did say she remembers when it was only 1 day. So I think through Rabbi Reuben, it was definitely 1 day. And then I told you the reason why they changed to 2 was
Well,
because
no,
the
that's in the morning.
makeup of the congregation was changing and there were more conservative and orthodox, and I
Right.
guess they wanted it.
No, it's definitely not a typical reform thing to have second day Rosh Hashanah, but you know, they do it and there's a reason, and there's a great lunch afterwards. It's very Thanksgiving. But
Especially the dressing, right?
oh my gosh, yes, Brian. We've got a couple new people that have joined us here. Just if you
Okay.
see Jason and Marty, they're from Dallas. They're going to be moving. They're going to be joining us in Savannah in the springtime. And so they emailed the rabbi and they emailed me. And so we've been in dialogue with them via email and telephone. And they thought they would like to join the class tonight. So
Welcome.
Welcome, Jason.
Yes, welcome.
Marty, hi.
Welcome, Marty.
Welcome.
So anyway, I always give people till 6:35 to tune in, then we start. People are notoriously late for coming into Zoom. So we just schmooze until 6:35, then we'll get the class started. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's we have, by the way, Jason and Marty, we have a chef at the synagogue at Mikveh Israel. And before COVID and the pandemic, we would, after Saturday Shabbat services, there would be a lunch for the anybody who attended services after to, you know, eat, schmooze, have a chance to visit, mix and mingle. And he does amazing food. He's very good. And we are very lucky and very fortunate to have him. He's now been doing where people can do Friday night food and pick it up to go. We bring it out to the curb, put it in your car for you. He's going to be doing some dinners like that for the high holy days as well. But yeah, when I tell people, yes, we're a synagogue, but we have a chef on the staff of the synagogue, it makes a lot of people really jealous, really jealous.
Well, I'm also a chef, so.
Oh.
There you go. It's always a good thing. Always a good thing. Yes, we are a very, under normal circumstances, other than the pandemic, we are a congregation that likes to sit and eat together. We really do. You can see people nodding their heads. It's a great way to, just stay in touch with people and visit with people after services. I mean, we're supposed to be a community at the synagogue. That's what it's all about. And so it's a great way of keeping that community going. So it's just one of the cool features. I mean, there are many cool features about Mikveh Israel, including some of the people you see here, when our rabbi and the rest of our staff too. But to have a chef on staff that makes really good food for us on Saturday, we all can't wait till somehow we can get back to those Saturdays, but that's still a little ways down the road yet. But we'll
I
get.
miss them. I miss my chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, that too. Yeah, chocolate. I miss chocolate chip cookies every day of my life.
And also, Jason, what we do is people sponsor these lunches, like for an anniversary or a birthday or a special guest or something. And that's how we can afford to do these wonderful lunches. And I mean, it's not cheese sandwiches. It's a real good.
Oh no, it's much
It's
more.
a gourmet meal.
You leave after services, you leave the synagogue and you're well fed. Let's just put it that way. All right, everybody. I'm a minute after 6:36. There may be some people who will be joining us later. That's okay, as they can come in. But I'm just going to mute everybody right now. If you have a question, you know what to do. Unmute yourself. Feel free to jump in and ask a question or a comment or whatever, or wave at me. But remember, you are going to have to unmute yourself, or nobody is going to be able to hear your question, including me. So welcome, everybody. Yom Kippur is the subject for tonight. Last week, we went thoroughly through Rosh Hashanah, and hopefully you learned some interesting facts about Rosh Hashanah, and hopefully you will learn some about Yom Kippur. Remember, both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are in the Torah. I read you the little piece last week where we are commanded to celebrate both of these days in the Torah. But remember, Rosh Hashanah, the term is not in the Torah, but the term Yom Kippur is in the Torah. It's very clear that we must have, as part of our celebrations, part of our holy days, a day of atonement. And that's what Yom Kippur means. I mean, you take it from the Hebrew, Yom Kippur means Day of Atonement. So let's just start with some basic general facts about Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is considered the holiest, most solemn day on the Jewish calendar. If you were going to pick out one day, and including all of our other holidays, and including Shabbat, and Shabbat is clearly very, very important, but this is considered to be the holiest day that we celebrate as a Jewish community. In fact, many of our rabbis, our sages throughout the years have called it the Grand Shabbat, or the Shabbat of all Shabbats. So it's interesting. So while we have Shabbat as our weekly sort of celebration holiday, this is the Grand Shabbat, or the Shabbat of all Shabbats, because it is designated as our most important day, our holiest day. And you'll remember that last week when we were talking about Rosh Hashanah, I used the metaphor of a courtroom trial. And Rosh Hashanah is where that courtroom trial starts, and Yom Kippur is where that courtroom trial finishes. And there is going to be, because it's on Yom Kippur, that we're going to get the final verdict. And of course, who is the judge? Who is going to render this verdict? It is going to be God. So the trial begins on Rosh Hashanah. 10 days later, on Yom Kippur, this metaphor of the courtroom trial will come to a close, and God will pass the final verdict, and then it's all over until the next year. This is, on our calendar, our most elaborate of all our synagogue services. More is added to the service for Yom Kippur than any other service. That, as you must know, if you have spent time in synagogue on Yom Kippur, it is our lengthiest service. Traditionally, you were technically supposed to be in synagogue all day. You don't leave. Now, in the Reform tradition, we take little breaks. We kind of divide the day into different sections or different pieces, and people can leave and come back or take a break if they want to. They don't have to, they can stay in the synagogue, but this is our most elaborate of synagogue services, and it is our lengthiest of synagogue services. So it takes a great deal of planning, and it takes a great deal of stamina for those who are leading the service. In our case, particularly on our rabbi, Rabbi Haas. I mean, he is up on the bima for a great deal of time. And of course, being a holiday, all the typical holiday restrictions apply. We are not to work. You know, that is forbidden on Yom Kippur. We light holiday candles at the beginning like we do for any other holiday. And because this is considered the grand Shabbat of all Shabbats, we actually do Havdalah at the end of Yom Kippur as well. I think if I recall last year, Rabbi Haas did a short Havdalah at the end of the service before dismissing us. The added element to Yom Kippur, however, that is not true of our other holidays, and is certainly not true of Shabbat, is we must do our fast. We begin fasting the evening before with the Kol Nidre or the Erev Yom Kippur service, and we continue that fast for the next 24 hours until the closing service has been completed. And when we're talking about fasting here, it's a serious fast. Many people may not be aware that you're not even to drink water. However, Judaism being the religion that celebrates life and realizing that life is so important, I was talking about this with some people before we came onto the class. There is something in Judaism that is called pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh means the saving of life. And the saving of life overrides everything, everything. So if fasting would do you bodily harm or somehow be damaging to your health, then by all means, you should not do it. For example, pregnant women should not be fasting. People who have certain conditions where they must have something in their stomach because of medications that they are taking should still take those medications and should take what they need in order to keep themselves healthy. Some people, it would be detrimental to their health to go without water for the full 24-hour period. So by all means, take some drinks of water when you need them. You know, though we fast, because part of this is supposed to be denying ourselves on Yom Kippur, by all means, not to the point where it is going to cause health issues, health problems, and certainly not to the point of death. But that's kind of what Judaism is. Life always supersedes everything. And so we say you fast, but we put those caveats on the fast just because that's what Judaism believes. So those are just some basic general facts about Yom Kippur, what it is, what we do. So let's talk about the major themes. The major themes of Yom Kippur, and you've got 3 Hebrew words there. You've got teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah, because the major themes of Yom Kippur are reconciliation and forgiveness. Again, it's reconciliation and forgiveness. That's what Yom Kippur is all about. We must reconcile ourselves with God. We should also be reconciling ourselves with our fellow human beings, our family, our friends, our colleagues, our coworkers, whoever, our neighbors. And then we are asking for forgiveness. And remember that in Judaism, God can give us forgiveness for sins against God, but only our fellow human beings can forgive us for sins against our fellow human beings. And we are obligated to do both. We are obligated to seek forgiveness from both. So that's the 2 major themes, reconciliation, forgiveness, and those 3 words there. So teshuvah, remember from last week, means to turn or to turn around, and it is the word we use for repentance. Because teshuvah, you turn back to God, or you turn around, you turn away from sin and evil thoughts and evil deeds, and you return to God. So teshuvah is the word that we also use for repentance. So we are repenting, we are saying we're sorry. Tefillah is the Hebrew word for prayer. So we also are supposed to pray. And there are many, many prayers that are involved, of course, in the Yom Kippur liturgy, but we are to pray even if it's not Yom Kippur. And tzedakah means good deeds or charity. So good deeds or charity. So through good deeds and charity, through prayer, through repentance, through those three Hebrew words, teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah. That is how we are going to find reconciliation. That is how we are going to find forgiveness. And if we want our names to be written in that proverbial, metaphorical book of life, by the time Yom Kippur ends, we are commanded to make sure we are doing teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and good deeds or charity. And that will bring about the reconciliation. That is going to bring about the forgiveness that is key to what Yom Kippur is all about. So that's where we are there. So that's just sort of what the whole thematic element of Yom Kippur is, that we kind of keep going back. And you'll see if you pay attention this year and in some of the things we're going to do, those concepts just keep being reinforced throughout the day, through the different prayers, as well as some other things, but it comes back to those two major themes. All right, so let's talk about some of the special features and special prayers that we have that sort of do make Yom Kippur different from our other traditional Shabbat services, and different even, say, from Rosh Hashanah or some of our other holiday services. First of all, we have Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre, which in Hebrew translates into English as all vows. All vows, that's what Kol Nidre means. It is, to many people who have a long background in Judaism and attending Yom Kippur services, it is a very, very moving prayer due to the very, very moving melody that is accompanying the prayer as the cantor sings it. Remember that in most congregations, before it is chanted and sung by the cantor and choir, if there is one, it will be played instrumentally. And you know, at Mikveh Israel, we have a wonderful cellist who plays the Kol Nidre on the cello. And if you've been there in the sanctuary to hear that, it's just a very, very moving. I mean, the cello has a certain sound to it that is sort of just gets inside you, and it's a bit mournful and it's a bit sad sounding. So you will hear the instrumental before the cantor begins chanting and the choir begins singing with the cantor. In traditional Judaism, the cantor is supposed to chant it 3 times. The same verse once, the same verse a second time, and the same verse a third time. It's the same words, it doesn't change. It's not 3 different verses. It's the same words chanted 3 times. Now, let's talk just for a second about Kol Nidre. It is, believe it or not, you may find this surprising, maybe you won't, it's controversial. It's a controversial prayer. So controversial that in Reform Judaism, for many years, it was taken out of the prayer book, taken out of the Machzor for High Holy Days. It was gone. It was eliminated. It was just not there. So what is controversial about the prayer of Kol Nidre? Well, the Kol Nidre prayer is saying to God, as we as Jews stand before God, that we want all our vows that we made to be annulled. So if we made a vow, the vow is annulled. You can't hold us to that vow. So what became controversial about that? Well, for many years, anti-Semites would use the words of the Kol Nidre prayer and say, aha, you see those Jews over there? You hear what they're praying on their holiest day of the year? They're saying that if they make promises and vows, they don't even have to keep to them. So how can we ever trust those Jews? So it became anti-Semitic. So because of that, because it was turned around and this prayer was turned against us, they just dropped it from the liturgy. It just was gone for a while. And if you've taken my Judaism 201, you know other prayers have come and gone out of the liturgy for controversial reasons over the years. When, however, we began to look back at the history of the prayer, what it really was designed to do was during times when there were forced conversions, when Jews were being forcibly converted to Christianity against their will, and they made the vow that they would renounce Judaism. they would turn their backs on Judaism and become followers of Christianity, Jews took the idea of that vow very seriously, and they felt very bad about it. But they didn't want to stick to it. They didn't want to stick to the vow that now we're going to practice Christianity, now we're going to become Christians. So the prayer really has the history of saying, if you promised under duress, under forcible conversion, to renounce your Judaism and to convert yourself to Christianity, this prayer is saying, we're not holding you to that. You don't have to do that. So once they realized there was a real history to this prayer, then it came back into the prayer book and has been in the prayer book for many, many, many years now. So a lot of people don't know that that's a history that exists with the Kol Nidre prayer, but there was a time when this very moving, we hear that on the cello, and the very somber and moving words of the Kol Nidre chant, the Kol Nidre prayer, for a while were just, they were just gone. It just was not there because they didn't want to have anybody turn that prayer against us as Jews. We had enough issues, we had enough trouble. We didn't need them using one of our prayers against us. So, but now, you would have to probably search far and wide an old prayer book to find one that omits Kol Nidre for Yom Kippur. So any questions about the Kol Nidre prayer?
Tim, just one question. As I remember, it's not forgive us for breaking vows in the past year. It's for sort of nullifying prayers in the coming year. Am I remembering that correctly? It's sort of
you would be remembering both ways. This is an argument that the sages and rabbis have continued throughout many, many years. There are some who believe that it's for vows already made in the past. There are some who believe it is for vows that will be coming in the next year. So I guess maybe, you split the difference between our sages and rabbis. As you know, they don't always agree. Maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe it takes care of those vows we have made and that we really don't want to be held to. And it's also maybe a sort of foreshadowing of, if I get into a situation in this coming year of a vow that I'm forced to make, but I really don't want to make, it's against my will. So maybe we can look at it as a little bit of both. But it's interesting because I was just reading something about, when I was looking at the history of Kol Nidre, I was just looking at this idea of the rabbis sort of not really sure whether it's supposed to be in the coming year or in the past year. And that's one of the beauties of Judaism. We kind of take both and say, okay, all right, maybe it's a little bit of both. So good question though. All right, so that is the prayer that really begins when we start, and we begin. This is on the night before Yom Kippur day. So people call the whole service Kol Nidre, although it's only one prayer. It's really Erev Yom Kippur. It's really the prayer that sort of really sets the tone, really sets a sort of somber mood for the evening service of Yom Kippur. All right, so we're going to move to the Vidui, and this will take us into the day service of Yom Kippur. The Vidui means confession. Confession. So a Vidui is part of the service on Yom Kippur because, after all, we're asking for forgiveness, we're asking for atonement, so we have to vocalize what we are asking forgiveness for. You will remember, for those of you who've been some of the classes before, that all the confessions we recite throughout Yom Kippur, we recite together. We recite as a congregation. It's not private, it's not in your head, it's not just between you and the rabbi. We all recite it together as a community. And that's because we don't want to point fingers and single anyone out. Oh, you're guilty of that, and you over there, you're guilty of that. Now, I might be guilty of this and you're not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We all recite all of them, and the confessional prayers are written in the plural. In the plural. They are not singular. We don't, in our confessional prayers, say, I am sorry for doing this, or I am guilty. It's always we. It's always we. We stand together as a community. We pray together as a community. We confess together as a community without singling anyone out for any particular sin or any particular level of wrongdoing. That is what Judaism does. That is what Judaism believes. We believe that as Jews, as a community of Jews, we take responsibility for all of us, for all of us. Okay, so we have that level of, we celebrate in good times together as a community. Here we confess sins together as a community, refusing to single any one person out as being better or worse or superior or whatever. So it's kind of a beautiful element that we have in our religion, is that we kind of do everything together and we write it that way. So in the prayer book, everything is in the plural. All right, so there are two different confessions that are recited on Yom Kippur. The first is the Ashamnu. Ashamnu. And for those of you who remember a little bit of Hebrew that I can teach you, remember that anything that ends in U with a U at the end is plural. So that's one way you know something is in plural in Hebrew, is when it's got the U at the end. So the name of the prayer is plural. Ashamnu translates as we have trespassed or we are guilty. That's what the word Ashamnu means. We have trespassed. Again, here it is. We, all of us. We have trespassed or we are guilty. Okay. This is oftentimes considered to be the shorter of the two Vidui prayers, the shorter of the two confessional prayers throughout the service. It is, if you look at it in Hebrew, it doesn't work when you translate it into English, but if you look at it in Hebrew, it's an acrostic prayer where it goes listing sins by the Hebrew alphabet, from the beginning of the alphabet to the end of the alphabet. And so this prayer was written that way, partly too because it made it easier to remember, because it gives it a little bit of that poetic element of being an acrostic sort of prayer or an acrostic poem. So there's, I mean, as we were talking with some people before, when people couldn't read and they didn't necessarily have a Machzor, a prayer book in front of them, this is one way they could remember. Now I sent you, if you print it off, I sent you a copy of the Ashamnu prayer. It's the one that says, it's the page 82. This is from the prayer book, from the Machzor, and it says Vidui confession, and then it says Vidui Zuta, the short confession. So you have that introduction to the confession above, which most times in Reform communities, they will say it in the English. So it's kind of a preparation that we are about to confess. And then if you look below that, you have the Ashamnu. And the first word of the Ashamnu is, of course, Ashamnu, because we start by saying, we are guilty, or we are going to confess. And then you have the whole list of sins there. God knew, remember, look at all of them ended U. All of them, because all of them are in the plural. All of them are in that communal idea. So of these wrongs, we are guilty. I'm not going to read through all the different sins. You can do that on your own, but that is a listing of sins. You can see, you know, we slander, we lie, we ridicule, we disobey, we defy, we corrupt, we're stubborn, you know, we're immoral, we kill, we spoil, we go astray. I mean, it's a pretty, you know, out there condemnation of the things that humans do that are wrong. But we stand together and say, we have done these things. Now, in some congregations, they sing the Ashamnu. They don't recite it, they sing it. In the congregation I was a part of in Ohio, I wish I could sing for you. I can't, you know me by now. I'm not a cantor and I don't play one on TV. But we had this wonderful, very interesting sort of Yiddishkeit melody that used to go to the Ashamnu, where you would sing about 4 of the sins. The rabbi would start. The rabbi that I had in Ohio wasn't much of a singer either, but don't tell him I said that. But anyway, we would start, there was something like Ashamnu, Bagadnu, and then they'd have like a Gazinu, the Barnu Dofi. And then you throw in, after like every 4 sins, this sort of I don't know if maybe you know that, if you ever sang it in any of your synagogues. It was so cool. And it's the only synagogue I've ever been in that did it. And I'm gonna have to write him, find out if there's a name for that. But we would do that, and we would do the confession. But like after every 4 mention of sins, we'd have this I thing that was very, very Yiddish. But it was really, it sort of, for me, it sort of made it kind of special. It's kind of special. I'll ask Rabbi Haas about it. If not, I'll call up to Ohio and ask the rabbi up there what it's called, if there's a special name for it. So anyway, that's the Ashamnu. It usually is done twice, somewhere through the Yom Kippur service, in the morning part of the service, and then again in the afternoon part of the service. But as people make edits to the service, maybe they'll do it once, maybe they'll do it twice, but traditionally it is recited twice at some point during the service in the synagogue at Yom Kippur. So any questions about the Ashamnu, the shorter of the two confessions? Okay, let's go to our second confessional prayer that is called the Al-Chet. The Al-Chet. Before we go into what the Al-Chet is, remember that Chet is the word for sin in Hebrew. However, it's a little different than Christianity's view of sin. The word Chet, the C-H-E-T, you know, got that in there. The word Chet is an archery term. You know, bows and arrows. It comes from archery, and Chet means the mark, missing the mark. The arrow didn't quite go where you wanted it to go, so you missed the mark. Kind of like when we do something wrong, we miss the mark. We're not living up to the values that we say we are supposed to live up to as Jews, as following the Torah, the ethics, the principles of the Torah. So rather than making it quite so condemnatory as a sin, we miss the mark. And we're human. God knows we're going to miss the mark. You look in the Torah, and how many times in the wandering in the desert did the Israelites miss the mark with their complaining and their kvetching, and they're upset and they want better food and they want to turn around and go back to Egypt and all of that stuff. So it's a little bit less than this concept of like we have like marks on us that are, you know, horribly, you know, denoting us as evil people, because that's not a Jewish way of looking at sin. Okay. As my rabbi in Ohio used to say, we do not sin because we are sinners. We do not sin because we are sinners. We are sinners because we sin. And I love that distinction. And you really kind of have to stop and think about that. Okay. We do not sin because we are sinners, comma. We are sinners because we sin. And that's a very, very important distinction to make. Judaism does not look at human beings as inherently evil beings. That is not a Jewish value. That is not a Jewish outlook. So we don't think of ourselves as, oh, we're these horrible sinners. I know that in some Christian traditions, they believe that even innocent babies are born with sin already at the time they're born. Well, that's not a Jewish value. That's not a Jewish outlook on humanity. We don't have this idea of people as being inherently sinful, inherently evil. Yes, we are humans, so we do sin. We do miss the mark at times. Yes, we know that. But we're not inherently bad people. We are not. And I think that's a very important distinction to understand in Judaism, because I think it's a beautiful distinction in Judaism, that we know we're going to make mistakes. You know, I don't know how many I make every day, but I probably would need more fingers and toes than I have. But it's not because I'm an evil person. It's like, you know, I make a mistake. I say a crossword to somebody. I have a bad thought about someone because they frustrated me or whatever. You know, they can be something as simple. I have a little bit of road rage because the person in front of me is driving 20 miles an hour on a 45-mile-an-hour zone, and I'm trying to get somewhere. You know, it's nothing so evil as I've gone out and committed murder or I've robbed a bank, but in their own way, you know, there are little things that I could be better. You know, so what? Somebody's going 25 miles an hour. I'm still going to get where I'm going to go, just maybe a few minutes later. You know, somebody frustrates me. Well, I'm sure I frustrate people all the time. Well, I know I do. Just ask the people I work with at Mikveh Israel. But, you know, we all do. We all do, because we're human. But we're not bad. We're not inherently bad, not inherently evil. So that's what the Al-Chet is. You know, we're missing the mark. We're not evil. We're not bad. We're just missing the mark. And I gave you the copy. Now, this is called, if you look at the handout that I sent on the longer confession, they call this the Vidui Rabbah. The word Rabbah means grand or large. So this is the grand confession or the larger confession. So rather than the shorter Ashamnu, this is the Vidui Rabbah, the grand confession. And as you can see, it takes up a little more room, 2 pages. And this is, and if you remember from Yom Kippur, this is where every single sin that we are going to delineate begins with the phrase, Al chet shekatanu lifanecha. Al chet shekatanu lifanecha, which means for the sin we have committed against you. That's what that phrase means. For the sin we have committed against you. And you can see that listed down there. If you look at the very first one, Al chet shekatanu lifanecha, Bazadon, Ovish Gaga. Okay, for the sin we have committed against you. Over and over, there's this repetition of this phrase, for the sin we have committed against you, for the sin we have committed against you. Because we are standing before God and we are standing as a community and confessing, these are some of the wrongs. And you can look at some of the things that we have to stand there and confess, that we have wronged you by deliberately and by mistake and harm we've caused in your world through the words of our mouths. Yes, the words of our mouths can do a lot of harm. They can do a lot of wrong. The second one, the ways we have wronged you by hardening our hearts and harm we have caused in your world through careless speech. Notice how this words and speech comes up in the first 2, because we all know that words can be so deadly and so dangerous. And sometimes, I know for me, I wish I could do a rewind and wish I had not said that, but that doesn't work. I don't have a rewind button. So you go through this litany of the longer sins. We mistreat other people. That's a sin against God. You say, but I thought God can't forgive me for sins against other people. Mistreating another person is a sin against God because God created that person. We are all creatures in the image of God. So when we mistreat another person, we have to say to God, I mistreated others. I shouldn't do that. You told me not to do that. I still have to go to Susie or Bob or Mary or Gretchen or Hildegard or whoever and say, I wasn't very nice to you. I really, really, did something really horrible to you that day at work. I'm really, really sorry. Could you please forgive me? And it's up to that person to grant you forgiveness. And there's also up to that person could say, forget it. But you have to make the effort nonetheless. Whether they say they forgive you or they say they do not forgive you, that's not up to you. You can only go and make the request, ask them to forgive you, and then hopefully, you can make it right with the person and you can move on. Now, also, with the Al Chet, because it is longer, and usually this one is recited, it is not sung. I've never heard the Al Chet sung. I don't know that anybody's ever put it to a melody, maybe they have. There will be little petitional prayers that will be stuck in. Look on page 419 at the very last paragraph on the Al Chet, the very bottom, where it says, V'al kulam Elohai slichot, salach lanu, mekal lanu, kaper lanu. That little piece is sung. And they will stick that in after every 2 verses of the Al Chet to break it up. So the choir leads it. It's got a melody that's very easy to sing along with. So we break it up with these little petitional this little petitional verse will just break up the recitation of the sins. Because it says, for all these failures of judgment and will, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, and lead us to atonement. So if you just maybe want to mark that last paragraph, that they will put in, they'll do the first 2 Al Chet paragraphs and then put that in. Then the next 2 Al Chet paragraphs, put that in. Then the final 2 Al Chet paragraphs and put it in one more time. It breaks up the recitation. It's a little bit of melody. It's a little bit of something that's easy for people to chant along with, sing along with, as we're going through this very long confession, this very long litany of where we have missed the mark throughout the year. Any questions about either confession, Vidui, Ashamnu, Al Chet? Yes, Maureen?
Yeah, just a question about Al Chet, and I'm asking kind of a naive question as someone who does not read Hebrew. It looks like, based on what you're saying about Al Chet, means at the beginning, this English that's not preceded by Hebrew. For these sins, our God, we ask forgiveness. Is that the translation of the Al-Hate Shatanu and the way, and then the ways we've wronged you, an alternative translation, or?
Right. In modern mocks or modern prayer book, they don't feel like they have to do, extremely literal translations all the time, as long as they get the gist of what the Hebrew is supposed to mean. So yes, you can say, for these sins, our God, we ask forgiveness, or for the ways we have wronged you, we ask forgiveness, because it's just continually reminding God, yes, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we've committed this sin against you. So yeah, they're both kind of loose translations of the Al-Hate phrase that begins every litany of sin in this particular confessional prayer. Okay, any other questions before yes, we have a question from Dallas. Yes, go ahead. Did you unmute yourself?
There we go. I'm looking at this where it starts on 86, and then you referenced some information that's here in 419. Am I to believe that this prayer is 300 pages?
Oh, are you looking at the note at the bottom? I'm not sure.
The pages that you emailed to us to follow along.
Yes.
At the very top, it starts the long confession on 86.
Yes.
And then it talks about the afternoon service. And it's page 419. These two.
No, that's a different part of the service. That's a different part we're going to get to. No, I see what you're saying. No, we're confessing sins. Whoa, that's one long confession. When they call it the long confession, that would have been really long. No, that's going to get to a different part of the service and a prayer that I wanted to look at later on. No, pretty much the 2 pages that I gave you of the Vidui Rabbah, the Al-Hate, that's the entire prayer as it is in the prayer book. So, question, Kathy, or are you just adjusting? I can't hear you. Oh, you're.
I had to adjust my camera.
Okay, all right, that's okay. Perfectly acceptable. All right, let's talk a little bit about Torah and Haftarah for the Yom Kippur service. It is the only day where we have 2 Torah services. There are 2 Torah services on Yom Kippur. There is a Torah and Haftarah reading for the morning service, and there is a Torah and a Haftarah reading for the afternoon service. So that sort of 2, we call it the Shabbat of all Shabbats, or the Grand Shabbat. Part of the reason is because we actually take the Torah out and have 2 different Torah readings, and we have 2 different Haftarah readings assigned for Yom Kippur as well. And of course, as you can guess, because when the Torah is divided into its different parashah, we pick sections that are thematically associated with what the day is all about. So same is true for Yom Kippur. The Torah is in the morning, the Torah portion is from Leviticus. And the morning Torah portion is a telling of the Yom Kippur ritual as it existed in the temple. Now, we don't have the temple anymore. We are not temple Judaism anymore. We are rabbinic Judaism. But it is a retelling from the Torah of what the Yom Kippur ritual that was carried out by the high priest, what they did. And of course, it was different than what we do now because we don't have a temple. There were sacrifices. It was the time when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies. It is said that it was the only time that the high priest actually uttered the unpronounceable name of God. So it still was a confessional thing. It was still something where people came for repentance to make teshuvah, but it was a very different kind of service than what we have today in our synagogues. So we read that as part of the morning Torah portion. The afternoon Torah portion for the afternoon service is the Holiness Code, which outlines how we as humans, whether we were alive then and alive today, how we can be holy people, how we can be people of God, living as best we can of what God expects of us. What are the Torah's commands of us if we truly are to be God's people, if we truly are to be a holy people? So that's what the afternoon Torah portion is about. So you'll have one chanted in the morning, one chanted in the afternoon. Of course, all the blessings and rituals for the Torah are done both times, the taking the Torah out of the ark, the Torah blessings and all of that are done both in the morning service, and then they are done again in the afternoon service.
I do
The
have a question.
Yes, yes.
Okay. You mentioned we're not temple Jews anymore, we're something else, and I didn't.
Rabbinic Jews. Once the temple was destroyed, the second temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, and we knew there was not going to be a rebuilding of the third, that became known as the period of Rabbinic Judaism, where we had to sort of rely on the rabbis, our sages, to figure out, now that we don't have a temple, how are we going to continue to be Jews? How are we going to continue to, follow the Torah? Because we had all these rituals in the temple and it's gone.
Okay.
So that's known as Rabbinic Judaism once the temple was destroyed, the second temple was destroyed.
Okay, and Leviticus is in the morning, the Torah portion, and then.
The Holiness Code is from Numbers, I believe. Numbers.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so the Haftarah, the additional reading that we do from the rest of the Hebrew Bible, the morning reading of Haftarah is from Isaiah. Okay, Isaiah, one of the greatest of our Jewish prophets. So we read from Isaiah, and it's a reading about righteousness. So you can certainly see how that fits in, and about proper social behavior, how we are to behave with our fellow human beings. So that too is very much thematically in line with what Yom Kippur is all about. So we hear about righteousness from Isaiah. We hear about proper social behavior from the prophet Isaiah. So that's for the morning Haftarah portion. In the afternoon, for the Haftarah portion, we have the book of Jonah. We all know the story, the traditional biblical story of Jonah and the whale. And a lot of people wonder why that particular story is chosen to be the Haftarah for Yom Kippur afternoon, because the theme of the story of Jonah, ultimately, we have the whole story of the whale. He's going to Nineveh to try to save the people from their wicked ways, etc. We know the story. But the overriding theme of the story of Jonah is that God's compassion is boundless. It doesn't end. So we don't have to worry that there's a finite supply of compassion within God. So if with that being the overriding theme of the book of Jonah for Haftarah, it makes sense that we could read something, because we are standing today as we stand in the synagogue praying, we are asking for a compassionate God to have mercy on us, to be forgiving to us. So we can certainly understand why that book, with that overriding thematic element, would be a very appropriate reading as a Haftarah reading for Yom Kippur. So again, 2 Torah services in one day, so you get 2. All the rituals and prayers that go with Torah and Haftarah reading are done both times. We don't skimp on them. We do them both times. So it's interesting, because it's rare that we would have, Shabbat we read from the Torah, we read the Haftarah, we do it once. We will do it once on Rosh Hashanah. We don't have 2 Torah readings and 2 Haftarah readings for Rosh Hashanah, only for Yom Kippur. So any questions about Torah and Haftarah for Yom Kippur? Okay, now let's move on to what is called the Seder HaAvodah. You know the word Seder because it's associated with Passover, and the word Seder means order. Order. Things done in a certain order, just like we do our Seder. Our Seder has an order. We follow the Haggadah. There are things we do, the rituals we do in a particular way every year when we get to celebrating Passover. So Seder HaAvodah, Avodah means worship or service. So Seder HaAvodah means order of worship or service. You're thinking, okay, so not quite getting this. What is that all about? Why are we reading about the order of worship, or why we are reading about the order of the service? This is part of the afternoon service. The Seder HaAvodah takes place in the afternoon service, and it goes through, again, we heard it in the Torah portion in Hebrew, but it goes through the retelling of Yom Kippur rituals of the Second Temple period. It's kind of like a history lesson, if you will. It's really one of the best ways to look at it. We're getting a history of our people. We're getting a history of our own people and how they celebrated at a time that is very different from ours. And it's just little paragraphs. I mean, it's condensed to some degree. And it's partly because the rabbis of old, in putting services together once we had rabbinic Judaism, thought that it was very, very important for us to understand where Yom Kippur came from, where it fits in our people's history, just like they felt it was important that we understand the story and order of creation, and that we understood the story of the flood and all of that. So we have this history lesson that we get in the middle. Now, we obviously celebrate differently. I will tell you that because we are a Reform synagogue, our reading of the Seder HaAvodah is much shorter than you would get in an Orthodox synagogue. The Orthodox reading of the Seder HaAvodah is much more detailed than what you're going to find in a Reform High Holy Day prayer book. But we still do it. It's still there. It's still part of the afternoon service. So even though, things come and go as rabbis make changes and add prayers and whatever, it's still very much considered to be important to understand something of the history of Yom Kippur as it was celebrated among the temple Jews, that we can only read about now because we no longer have a temple. I see I have a couple of questions that came in through that I missed here because I'm too busy talking. Something about pride. It seems like humbling to your fellow man is part of the okay thoughts. Yes, we do have to humble ourselves. We have to humble ourselves before our friends, our family, our coworkers, our colleagues. We must humble ourselves before God. That really is what we are doing on Yom Kippur when we stand and recite these prayers. Yeah, pride has to go away. Yom Kippur is not a day to stand there and think you're better. In fact, some people, I forgot to mention this, when they are reciting the Al Chait as a humbling gesture, they will take their fist and just lightly beat their breast over their heart with every sin that is mentioned as a sort of humbling gesture. Because the heart is where everything begins. It is the source of life. And so in our lives, we commit these sins and we commit these errors. So we are willing to humble ourselves, and we have to. It is humbling to ask for forgiveness. It definitely is. I don't know about you, but it's hard to look somebody in the eye and say, I wronged you. I did something horrible to you. It's not, we don't look at God's eye, but to know that God, not any easier to say to God, I messed up. I missed the mark. Not just once, not just twice. Stop counting, God. I know there's a lot of times. So it is something that we have to be aware of. And it's part of what we have to do when we are, standing in the synagogue and we are saying the prayers. So that's the Seder HaAvodah. It's done in Reform synagogues, obviously in English for the most part, with a few little Hebrew phrases here and there, so people can understand it. So as they're hearing this history, they can actually understand what is being read to them, and they can understand what was going on in Yom Kippur in the days of the temple. All right, then we get to Yizkor. Yizkor, I know a lot of people say Yizkor, but I insist on being a little Hebrew about it. Yizkor. Yizkor comes from the word for remember. Remember. So it's from the root that means remember. And for those of you who know, we do Yizkor for certain services throughout the year, certain holidays throughout the year. At this point on Yom Kippur, we recite prayers and we recite psalms that are read in memory of those who have died, our loved ones who are no longer with us that we want to remember. Because on this day, we are also facing a bit of our own mortality in this ongoing cycle of life and death. So it's fitting that we would be thinking about those who have gone before us. In many synagogue communities, including Mikveh Israel, as you know, we will publish for Yom Kippur something that is called a book of remembrance, where people can just, have a line in the book that remembers you know, fathers, mothers, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, children, whatever, people that they want to specifically call to memory when the Yizkor service is done. Of course, part of that, of course, is reciting Kaddish in memory of those who have passed away. There are, for some people on Yom Kippur, this is the most important service to them. They will be okay missing some parts of the service, but they definitely want to make sure that they are back in synagogue in time for the beginning of the Yizkor service. So it's very, very important. Somebody asked the question, is it not important for us to humble ourselves and offer forgiveness? Yes, it's humbling. And you also have to be strong in yourself to offer forgiveness, but you can't force somebody to do it if somebody doesn't feel they can, if somebody doesn't feel they're ready to, if somebody doesn't feel like it's within them to say, I forgive you at that moment, maybe later, maybe not now. Nobody can tell us when we're at that moment. I mean, you can use something really big like the Holocaust. You know, for those of you who have read literature of the Holocaust, you look at somebody like Elie Wiesel and the idea of never forget, never forget. Forgetting is not the same as forgiving. Elie Wiesel, I was lucky enough to hear him speak once, many, many years ago. And he talked very much about the idea of we must forgive. We cannot hold this grudge in our hearts forever. Forever, although some people do. Some people have never forgiven. He says, we can't forget. It's important that the memory of those we lost is always, always remembered. But we can't, because if we don't forgive, it hurts us. It hurts us. And so we forgive. It's not easy. You don't look at an event like the Holocaust, and it may not be easy in something personal. Somebody may have hurt you deeply, very deeply, and it's not easy to just sort of say, okay, I forgive you. Or maybe you can say it later, but I can't say it right now. I'm not ready. So yeah, there's a lot of our own human psychology that comes into being willing to ask forgiveness and being willing to offer forgiveness on both sides. So it's important. So we have the Yizkor service where we do the remembrance of those who have passed, and we say the prayers and we recite the Psalms, and we have that chance to kind of think back on those who have gone before us, because as I said, part of Yom Kippur is facing our own mortality as well. I mean, some of the prayers make that clear that, you know, we are all going to be there at some point. All right, finally we get to the Ne'ilah service. Okay, long day of praying, long day of readings, long day of in the synagogue. The Ne'ilah means closing or locking. Closing or locking. That's what the word Ne'ilah means. Closing or locking. It is the final service of a long day in synagogue for Yom Kippur. It lasts about an hour. So once it begins, you know, you've got about an hour to go before, you know, you've made it through the marathon of all the different parts of the Yom Kippur service. The idea of closing or locking is part of the metaphor that the gates of heaven, the gates of repentance, God is about to close them and lock them. Close them and lock them. They're going to close, they're going to lock. And if you haven't made your repentance, if you haven't returned to God, it's going to be too late for you. You are not going to be inscribed in the book of life. And that's what we want for all of us, is to be inscribed in that book of life. So this metaphor of the closing of the gates of repentance, the closing of the gates to heaven, because none of us want to be left out. We all want to be in when the gates close. So that's where the name of the service comes from. Because we've got this last final hour of prayer, because tefillah is part of repentance. We've got this last final hour of prayer to make it all good, to make it all right. If we haven't done so by this time, it's getting down to the wire, people. It's really getting down to the wire. So in this service, just a couple of key elements of this service, many of the prayers in this last hour are pleas. Please, P-L-E-A-S, not with an E on the end. We are making pleas to God to find our prayers acceptable. We hope that God, please God, you're finding our prayers acceptable. We hope you have found the worship we've given you, the prayers that we have recited, that we have said together as a community, that you have found them acceptable, because prayer, tefillah, is part of that repentance and forgiveness. The prayers remind us, again, that God's judgment, as this courtroom, this metaphorical courtroom over the last 10 days, that God's judgment is about to be rendered and sealed. God is, remember the Utana Tokef prayer from last week? Who shall die by fire, who by this, who by that? Well, God supposedly has this all figured out by now. God's got a lot of responsibility on Yom Kippur because he's doing this for all of humanity, and he's made his decision. He's rendering his judgment. You're going to be inside the gates. You're going to be okay. For you, thumbs down, not so much. I mean, it's metaphorical. We really don't, literally believe that. But that's the metaphor of the prayers of Yom Kippur. Traditionally, in the synagogue, this service, the ark is open for the entire service. The doors of the ark are open. And of course, when we have the doors of the ark open, we see the Torah scrolls. And when the doors of the ark are open, what are we supposed to be doing? Standing, standing. Traditionally, you are to stand for that full hour. And remember, this is after a long, long day of fasting. You're getting tired, you're getting weary, not to mention hungry. So it's that last bit of, I can do this for God, I can do this for repentance, I can do this to make sure that God understands that I am serious about my forgiveness and wanting reconciliation with my fellow human beings and wanting reconciliation with God. So the ark the doors are open, the Torah scrolls are there, we stand in reverence before God as we do whenever the doors of the ark are open. And we recite all of the different prayers. Avinu Malkeinu will be sung one more time. We've been hearing that song, that hymn throughout the days of the High Holy Days, starting with Slichot and then Rosh Hashanah. And we're going to hear it one last time during the Ne'ilah service. The service of Ne'ilah ends with a final blast of the shofar. So one of the things we're waiting to hear before we're going to get to till next year's High Holy Days is that final shofar blast that we will hear, and a final recitation of the Shema are the two things that really bring the Ne'ilah service to a close. So that final shofar blast, that final recitation of the Shema, and it actually, if you look at the rubric in a lot of prayer books, it says that we are to recite the Shema, this last recitation of the Shema, with vigor and with energy. And you're thinking, at the end of a long day, how much vigor and energy can I possibly have? But we are supposed to do this with a certain amount of enthusiasm and energy, because we are supposed to feel, after all of this long day of prayer and confession, renewed. We are supposed to feel renewed. And let's all be honest, what we're really feeling is hungry, which is okay. It's okay. Yes, Maury.
I think even as metaphor, I guess the Ne'ilah service is part of what I find really challenging or discouraging about Yom Kippur in the temporal sense. If you don't, make things right now, you're not going to have another chance. I mean, maybe it's just my own idiosyncrasy, but thinking in terms of, how I live my life, I can, fix mistakes at other times. And I guess the idea of, kind of going into the service with the intent of doing all this during the service, yeah, that's great. But the whole thing, I mean, the doors are closing, you're not going to get another chance. And if you don't do this right, you're not inscribed in the book of life. And I know it's not literal, that, we're not saying at people's funerals, well, he was 103 years old, but he didn't do right at Yom Kippur, and that's why he died this year. So, again, I mean, maybe this is my own problem, but I know, you've commented a couple of times about a friend of yours who is troubled by or disliked the Yom Kippur service as much as I did. So I would appreciate comment.
It's true. It's true. A lot of people are very bothered by the sort of metaphor, even though it's metaphorical, it's so daunting and it's so almost like it's meant to be like almost inspire you to be afraid and fearful, which I don't know if that's really what it's supposed to do. But yeah, I've had conversations with many people who say, I just can't buy into it. It just bothers me. It just doesn't work.
Tim, if you take everything literally, it would be overwhelming and more than I could handle. But I just feel like, nobody's perfect. And we do and as long as we just say during this time, we're sorry for the things that we've done that maybe aren't so nice. We're going to really try hard to be better next year. You can't, nobody's perfect. I mean, you're just not going to be this wonderful person because there are days that you just don't feel like it.
I agree with you. I think part of Yom Kippur is meant to really give us a focus for that day on sins or missing the mark, what we do wrong, but we should carry that through the whole year. When we have issues and problems throughout the year, we try to make them right, we try to fix them, we try to do the right thing. But this is one day where we really focus specifically on forgiveness, reconciliation, the wrongs we've committed, because I can't believe that, at the end of the Ne'ilah service and the gate supposedly closed, that's it. And we all know it doesn't really work that way. We all know that. But it's a kind of a metaphor to know that we are human beings. We all have a mortal life. At some point, we are going to pass on. And so we really shouldn't waste time saying, oh, well, I'll ask for forgiveness later, or I'll make that right later. We should be doing it all the time. And maybe Yom Kippur is a reminder to us that we should be doing it all the time. It's just a thought, just an idea that might soften the blow a little bit of, the idea of the closing of the gates and, I'm in real trouble now,
Both your comments and Kathy's were helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else comments about Yom Kippur before we talk about some of the customs and traditions of Yom Kippur? Yes, question, go ahead.
What about children? Are there special allotments, reservations made for children participating in Yom Kippur, or are they intended or expected to participate just as fully and understanding as the adults do?
Generally, until they are bar bat mitzvah age, they are not required because they are not of age to really have any great depth of understanding of the themes and ideas. Once they have become bar mitzvah or become bat mitzvah, then yes, they are supposed to take on religious responsibilities and religious obligations. A lot of synagogues, understanding, that they are young people and we want them to understand what the day is all about, will actually have oftentimes a separate service or a separate part of the service where the young people can go out of the main service and into another part of the synagogue and do a little discussion and talking in a modern sense about the themes and ideas with, somebody who's kind of leading them, and talk, in a sense that makes more sense to a teenager perhaps than the lofty prayers and whatever. So up to bar bat mitzvah age, children are pretty well exempt, but most synagogues will also do a children's service, so at least young kids can get some aspect of the holiday. And then the teenagers will have something that relates more to them. But they are expected, the teenagers especially, are expected to be in the synagogue for certain parts of the service, for sure.
In terms of how far to extend observance of the holiday, my mother of blessed memory claimed that growing up they would make their cat fast.
Okay, cats and dogs fasting. Well, okay, our cat is a rabbi, so I guess maybe he really should. Anyway, so because our cat is Barry and his last name is Katz, K-A-T-Z, so we call him Rabbi Barry Katz all the time. So We've tried to put a yarmulke on him, but he doesn't really like it that much. It stays on for about 10 seconds if we're lucky. All right, let's finish up with some of the customs and traditions. First of all, one custom or tradition is that the Kol Nidre service, the evening service, the day before the long day, is the only time that you wear a tallit for an evening service. You don't wear tallit on evening services ever, any other time of the year. But if you are going to wear a tallit, a prayer shawl, you wear it on the evening service of the evening before, and then you wear it for the entire day of Yom Kippur. That's the only exception. Tallit is for morning services only. That's the Jewish tradition, but this is the exception. So for those who wear the tallit, and you will probably see well, you won't see it this year because we won't be there, but if you would look around the synagogue, more people, men and some women now too, will put on tallit for Yom Kippur than any other day of the year. They may not wear it traditionally for Shabbat services, but it kind of special because of the day itself. So you do wear it for the evening service as well as the rest of the day. Another tradition of Yom Kippur that some people still keep to this day, it was traditional to dress in white, wear white clothing on Yom Kippur, to symbolize purity, because we are trying to cleanse, we are trying to repurify our souls in dedication to God, into starting over again. So it was traditional to wear white. In some more Orthodox synagogues, they will wear this garment called a kittel, which is sort of a white roby garment over their clothing to sort of represent that idea of purity. That's not really a Reform thing, but if you were to attend an Orthodox synagogue for the Yom Kippur service, you would see that. Yom Kippur traditionally is supposed to be a time as well of increased giving to charitable causes. So if there's a time of year, a lot of Christians will do that, say for Christmas or Easter, they'll pick a charity and give. Yom Kippur is a time of increased charitable giving for Jews. Because remember, tzedakah, good deeds, charity, is part of how repentance is won. So if there's a particular cause that is important to you, to your heart, or even giving a little extra to the synagogue itself, that's a tradition for Yom Kippur. One of the traditions we don't hear a lot about is, okay, so we know that we're supposed to fast. We know that we're supposed to, refrain from eating, drinking water, etc. We are also to refrain from a few other things on Yom Kippur too. You are not to wear perfumes, aftershave, cologne on Yom Kippur. So those are supposed to, stay on the shelf for Yom Kippur. You're not to shave for Yom Kippur. So that is something you are not supposed to do. You are not supposed to wear leather shoes on Yom Kippur. Leather shoes. You will see people, men and women, going into Yom Kippur services with beautiful suits or beautiful dresses, and they'll have athletic shoes on, sneakers. Because leather is considered to be something that is soft, it's comfortable. It's something that brings you pleasure, and you're supposed to be denying yourself of that. And you're not supposed to have sexual relations on Yom Kippur either. So,
No.
yes, question, go ahead. Dallas, I see a hand. Go ahead.
I've heard also about like jewelry, rings, that sort of thing.
There's nothing that prohibits that for Yom Kippur. A lot of people want to come fairly simply dressed, but it's not really necessary. But I always find it interesting to see tennis shoes, sneakers, athletic shoes with a beautiful suit or a beautiful dress. But a lot of people will do it, interestingly enough. So those are some other things we're supposed to refrain from. Traditionally, we are supposed to spend the entire day in the synagogue. As I said, in Reform, we give breaks where people can take some time out, step out if they want to. And then we'll talk about everybody's favorite tradition, and it's on your sheet, break the fast. Break the fast. after this long day of denying ourselves of good food and of drinking, and a lot of people, it's very difficult for them not to have their morning coffee, that kind of thing, or morning tea, whatever. We have a break the fast meal traditionally after the closing of the Ne'ilah service. Some synagogues, like Mikveh Israel, would do it in the synagogue. You have never seen people who are so anxious to get to some food as you will at the end of Yom Kippur. Other people may go home and have something at home. Traditionally, for break the fast, you eat dairy foods, like a dairy meal. So you'll have tuna salad, egg salad, salmon salad, things that are going to be fairly easy to digest because, complicated proteins are difficult on a stomach that's been empty for 24 hours. And after this long day, you don't want to go home with a stomach ache or go home and give yourself a stomach ache and then be awake all night with stomach ache, stomach pains. So we tend to eat foods that are easier for the digestive system. And if you'll think about kugel, kugel is a good thing. Cheesecake. Who doesn't love a good cheesecake? Yes. We have 2 cheesecake holidays in Judaism. We've got this one, and then we've got Shavuot, which is also for the dairy foods. So cheesecake is good. Cheese blintzes also you can partake of as well. So those kind of foods that are easier to digest, that are going to sit well on the stomach after a day of fasting. And of course, you can partake now of a glass of wine if you would like. 2 years ago, I remember somebody at one table, and this was in the synagogue, in the social hall, they were passing around a bottle of bourbon and doing shots at the table, along with the break the fast. And hey, why not? It's okay. In spite of what it sounds like, Yom Kippur is a holiday, and so if you want to, with your friends and family, have a shot of bourbon or whatever your spirit of choice is, or a glass of wine or champagne, why not? Why not? Make it a celebration because you are coming to the end. Because literally when that finishes, the high holy days come to an end. The days of awe, those 10 days are finished. We're going to be looking upon Sukkot and Simchat Torah, but those are holidays that really are not high holy days. They just happen to fall very close in line after the completion of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So hopefully you got a little bit more knowledge, understanding of Yom Kippur, some new insights perhaps that you didn't have before, understanding a little bit about the idea of how we confess, the confessional prayers, and whatever. Anybody have
Very, very interesting, Tim, as always.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Anybody have any final
Very
thoughts?
good. Yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You are welcome. Anybody else? Final thoughts, comments? Anybody want to sing a song or something? I'm not going to, but well, I thank you again for joining in this class. As I said, we're going to take a brief hiatus from the Tuesday night classes because we're a lot with the high holy days coming up and it's very busy. Even though we're planning everything virtually, it's actually taking more work to do that, believe it or not, than it would be if you were all going to be coming into the sanctuary for the services. So I'll be helping the rabbi with that and the rest of the staff. But again, please, 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 if an idea comes to you for a class you would like to see as one of these Tuesday night classes, send me an email. Don't tell me now because I will forget. But send me just drop me a quick email. How about a class on this? Some of you have done that already. I've gotten some really good ideas that I'm thinking about for when we resume classes. But if an idea strikes you, just drop me an email and just say, how about a class on this? Or maybe we should do a class on this, or this might be a good idea. It might be interesting. I am open to all kinds of suggestions. As I've told you, I like doing the research and all of this. This is how I thrive. And yes, we have a question or comment.
I know you said traditionally we're not supposed to partake in technology, things like that, but since we're in a special situation, will the Yom Kippur service be Zoomed or streamed where we can, like, we're in Dallas and everything is locked down, so we won't have any interaction with anybody other than ourselves and our neighbors. So,
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
we do, because Reform Judaism is much more lax on all of that than Orthodoxy. So we have been streaming Shabbat services since mid-March. We will be streaming. You'll be able to look at, you can go to the YouTube, the Mikvah Israel YouTube channel. And I put you on the email. So you will be getting the emails, and it will have all the directions for tuning in for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur, the evening services, the day services, etc. So yes, we will be streaming all of that. So you'll be able to tune in for all of the high holiday services. We're going to be, you won't be able to come to drive-in Sukkot, but you know, we're going to be doing a drive-in service for Sukkot. We're borrowing a Christian church who has been doing drive-in Sunday services, a friend of the rabbis, a minister who is the friend of the rabbis. So we're going to be doing Sukkot at their place because they have an outdoor place all set up for it. But we'll be in our cars. It'll be like going to the old drive-in movies, but it'll be Sukkot instead. And everybody in their car, but we'll still be able to have a service and at least have something where we can kind of get together. That'll be for Sukkot morning service. And then I'm not sure, we were talking today at our staff meeting this morning about, we're not sure exactly how Simchat Torah, because you all know Simchat Torah, we're supposed to dance with the Torahs and parade around, and the kids have their flags and we sing and whatever. It's happy, it's joyous, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of hard to do that virtually, but we'll figure something out. We are resourceful, creative people, and we will figure something out, and you will get word on that too. So yes, everything will be there. Any other final thoughts, questions? Again, feel free to email me with ideas. I love ideas. I can't think of everything. I have a pretty active mind, but I love someone to throw me an idea every now and then. So, all right,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Good night. Be safe. For those of you in the hot weather here, and I imagine Dallas must be fairly hot too, stay cool, you know, because it is very, very warm out there. And I wish all of you safety, and look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, everybody. Good night.